All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. It is 12:01. I want to honor your time this afternoon on this Friday. I'm Emily Sollenberger. I'm a program director here at the State Arts Council. I'm joined by my co-program director, Laura Weiss, who's here. And we also have our colleague, Kirk, who's going to be helping us with this program moving forward. So I'm so glad he was able to join us. But you are here because we are hosting an information session of how to apply for the touring grant and the touring roster. We are going to hold time to about an hour today. We're going to get through quite a few slides to go into the program overview, the applications, kind of some next steps and logistics, and then we'll spend some time for questions at the end of the session. So before we kind of get into the details of it all, we're going to go ahead and start with some grounding slides here. This is a reference shot of Google Meet, and just to familiarize yourself with some of the tools here, your dashboard is likely towards the bottom of your screen. Just be mindful of the microphone and the camera feature there to the bottom center left. Make sure you're on mute for right now, and then if you're ready to speak, you can take yourself off mute. You're welcome to be on camera or not. We also have closed captions here if you need them. There's that box with the 2 C's in the middle there. The raise hand feature you can use towards the end if you have a question at any point. And then that red telephone receiver button is to end the meeting. If you click that by mistake, it's okay. Just join the link that you used to get into this meeting to get back. Also, towards the bottom left or right corner, we have our chat feature. It's that kind of bubble, that square box bubble there. And you're welcome to use that if you are not able to vocalize anything today, have questions, comments. Laura and myself, we might be dropping some links in there for reference. So just be mindful of your chat box. All right, and I'm going to go through some grounding slides here to further get us started in our work. The first is our land acknowledgement statement, and I'm going to read this aloud for accessibility purposes. We acknowledge the land and waters now known as Maryland are the home of its first peoples, the Accohonic Indian Tribe, Assateague Peoples Tribe, Cedarville Band of Piscataway Indians, Choptico Band of Indians, Lenape Tribe, Nanticoke Tribe, Nasu-Wawash Band of Indians, Piscataway Conoy Tribe, Piscataway Indian Nation, Pocomoke Indian Nation, Susquehannock Indians, Yakagani River Band of Shawnee, and tribes in the Chesapeake watershed who have seemingly vanished since the coming of colonialism. We acknowledge that this land is now home to other tribal peoples living here in diaspora. We acknowledge the forced removal of many from the lands and waterways that nurtured them as kin. We acknowledge the degradation that continues to be wrought on the land and waters in pursuit of resources. We acknowledge the right of the land and waterways to heal so that they can continue to provide food and medicine for all. We acknowledge that it is our collective obligation to pursue policies and practices that respect the land and waters so that our reciprocal relationship with them can be fully restored. The next one is our equity and justice statement, and that is the arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its supporting collaborators are committed in advancing, modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. And the vision of the State Arts Council plays an essential role in ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts. And we do this through our mission, which advances the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. All right, the next slide here are 5 of our goals from our current strategic plan. We are at the tail end of our current strategic plan and making steps forward into a new process to build off of our current strategic plan in the kind of next phase of the State Arts Council. But for now, we're honing in on these 5 goals that are bolded here. And goal 1 is to increase participation. Goal 2 is to provide intentional support. Goal 3 is to build capacity. Goal 4 is to leverage connections. And goal 5 is to bolster Maryland arts. And we really are honing in on goal 2 here of providing intentional support today to you all with this particular program. We also like to start all of our public meetings with keeping these creative meeting actions in mind. So I'm going to read these as well. So keeping in mind as we move forward today to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot, enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry, share your idea and trust that it will be heard, use I statements, focus your language on the task at hand, hold one another accountable with care, apply yes and, I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it, and balance your speaking and listening. This next slide is a bit of information just to keep in mind about the State Arts Council throughout the year, that we offer different types of professional development. And a lot of these can be found on our Eventbrite page for the State Arts Council, and I believe Laura just dropped the link in the chat for reference, but they include topic-specific sessions, sometimes around financial matters, legal advice, marketing, and other topics that we hear throughout the year from constituents and folks across the state. We also offer Coffee with the Council on Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. Right now, we don't have any during the month of August, but we'll be picking those up, I believe, and starting every other Tuesday moving forward. The State Arts Council is also holding regional office hours throughout the year where we're coming to a county near you. So I think our next one will be in September in Southern Maryland. I believe at Anne Marie Sculpture Garden is going to be our host. And then we'll be out on the Eastern Shore in October, and we'll continue with those monthly throughout the year. And also noting that we work with Maryland Citizens for the Arts for the annual Maryland Arts Summit, and that's typically in June. Okay, and another advertisement, if you will, is our ways to get involved. We have a page on our website of ways that you all can get involved further, and one of those ways is to be a panelist or an editor within our program. So we really rely heavily on the public and our communities to come and serve as panelists. It's a great way to dig a little bit deeper into some of our programs and to kind of get that behind the scenes look at different applications and the review process. But the main goal is to evaluate our applications that are submitted to the State Arts Councils. So you'll work with the program staff depending on that particular program and get trained and support. And it's also compensated, so you'll get paid for your service. Okay, so moving along, I mentioned this at the top of the hour, but just to reiterate today's agenda, we're going to go through the presenting and touring program. So we're going to look specifically at the touring roster and the touring grant. We're going to step into logistics and the monthly review process and what that looks like, and go through our grants portal, which is called Smart Simple, to give a little overview about that, and then spend some time with any questions that you might have. Okay, and just an overview to get us started. The purpose of the presenting and touring program, it's really a collaborative program overall. So it's intended to support a very rich and artistically diverse network of Maryland professional artists and performing arts organizations. So again, there's 2 different opportunities with the presenting and touring program. It's the Maryland Touring Grant, and that's really specifically for organizations to apply for funding. And then we also have the touring artist roster, and that's for our artists and groups to join the roster. And essentially the Maryland Touring Grant is to support the presentation of somebody from the touring roster. And we're going to get into some more details there as we move along. But I'm going to hand it over to Laura to go through the roster.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. And thank you everybody for joining us today for our session. So first we're going to talk about the touring roster. And like Emily said, it's kind of two sides of the coin, the roster being one side and the grant being the other. So first we're going to look at what the Maryland touring roster is. It's a listing of touring artists from across Maryland. Any kind of performer is what we're looking for when it comes to this particular roster. So you could be a solo performer, or you could be a performing company, ensemble, group, whatever that definition is, meaning more than one performer that can join the roster. We look at all means of performers as part of this roster program. So we have many different kinds of musicians and dancers, theater artists, improv artists, poetry, people who do spoken word, any kind of performer is welcome to apply here. We promote the roster and the funding opportunity associated with it, which is the touring grant, to presenters then. The goal is that you are receiving bookings and artist fees while working collaboratively with those presenters. So that way you're able to help them write the touring grant to help support your presentation. But ultimately the touring grant part of it is coming from the venue, the organization. So Emily's going to talk more about that one later. But if you're interested in joining the roster, you would need to submit an application, and those are reviewed monthly, and they have a rolling deadline. So that means that you can apply anytime you want, and then they're reviewed subsequently every month. And we'll go through what that schedule looks like a little bit later. Some of the logistics in terms of who can apply, who is eligible to apply for the roster. You must be a Maryland resident and you must be at least 18 years of age. If it is a group or ensemble, all members must be at least 18 years of age and at least 50% must be Maryland residents. If it is a group of some sort, the company's primary place of business must be located in Maryland. We do allow for college and university-based performers as long as they are over the age of 18, and you must perform regularly off campus for professional fees. So if you're, a college band, and you're performing elsewhere other than just your campus and you're being paid regularly for that, you can absolutely apply to join the roster. In some cases, we do have groups that have their own nonprofit status, and that is allowed. The makeup of that performing ensemble must meet the eligibility criteria that I just spoke about when it comes to the performing companies and groups. So just something to keep in mind. And there are other specifics that go into other eligibility requirements within the program guidelines. So just be sure to check that out as well before applying. In addition to the age and the residency requirements that we spoke about, the applicants must be able to demonstrate that they do have some kind of history of professional touring engagements. So when we talk about tour here, what we mean by tour is a public performance in a venue or venues that are not typically or regularly scheduled by the performer and within the state of Maryland. So this might include a one-time performance, or you might, be going to a location and performing for a week there, or for many different performances. A tour in this scenario does not equal national or international travel. So we're just looking within the state of Maryland, and we're just looking at that you're going out and you're performing at places other than within your direct neighborhood or community or right where you're located. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about tour in this context. The touring roster application itself, it's pretty brief. It's just 5 brief narrative questions and then some supplemental materials. So the questions themselves, they really focus on what your artistic goals are and how touring fits into those goals. We're looking for some information about how you manage your tours and how you program any kind of arrangements when it comes to those tours. We're looking for a description of the basic space requirements for when you go to a venue to present or perform. There is a section to talk about any educational or residency offerings that you might also offer when you go to a place. This is just an optional thing, really. It's just informational if that is something that you offer when you go to a venue or an organization. And then the supplemental materials really come in the form of different attachments. And what we look for are some work samples, 3 work samples. And those typically are videos and or audio samples, a list of touring engagements, an example of your contract, and an example of some promotional materials. And you can find the full application and exactly what the questions are and exactly all of the specifications of this, along with the scoring rubric itself, on msac.org. The next couple of slides are a couple of different frequently asked questions that we get when it comes to the touring roster. So I'm just going to read these out loud. Hopefully these help if you have some questions that might be going on in your head. One of the most frequently asked questions is, I've been accepted onto the touring roster. When do I receive my grant? So the touring roster itself is not a grant program. So there's not funding directly associated with joining the roster. The funding comes from the touring grant, which Emily's going to talk about in just a few slides. So it works in conjunction with that touring grant, which would be awarded to the organization or the venue to then present you or your group at the location. But the first step is that you have to join the touring roster before you can have that touring grant. So it kind of works in a sequential order, if you will. But there's not direct funding associated with the touring grant. Can being on the touring roster help me with national or international bookings? And like we said before, we're really looking at Maryland-based tours here. So, so this cannot, it's not something that's going to necessarily help with national or international bookings. The touring grant is only eligible for those Maryland-based presentations. And in this case, we're only looking at Maryland-based artists as well. I don't have a quote unquote professional video or work sample to share. Is that okay? Absolutely. Panelists are not scoring on the quality of the video itself. They're really looking at your work as a performer. So you don't need to have any kind of professional reel or video, anything like that. We just want to make sure that you can be seen and heard clearly. So if you can accomplish that on your iPhone or whatever, that is perfectly fine. And we encourage you to do that if that works for you. How do I connect with potential presenters? So that is something that we are hoping to be able to do more and more of. So we're currently working on ways to increase opportunities for presenters and touring artists to connect. A few years back, in 2022, we offered our first ever virtual touring artist showcase, and we are in the early phases of planning to do that again. So that's an opportunity for touring artists to kind of show what they do and have presenters see that. So that's something that definitely stay tuned for. And if that's something that's of interest to you, definitely make sure that you submit to join the roster, so that way you could potentially be a part of that. And I think that's it for the touring roster part. So I'm going to hand it over to Emily to talk about the other side of the coin, the touring grant.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, so moving into the Maryland Touring Grant. So again, as mentioned before, the grant is supporting an organization's presentation of an artist from the touring roster. This is also a rolling deadline, so a presenter can apply at any time, and these applications are reviewed monthly. So very similar schedule to the roster as well. The touring grant helps to subsidize the presentation of any of those performers on the touring roster. The application can be from multiple performers and or events. So if you're interested in hiring, 2 or 3 artists for a festival coming up, you can certainly include all of those performers in that one application. The touring grant is available for up to $5,000 total. And again, grant applications are accepted on a rolling basis and reviewed monthly. And an organization can only receive one grant per fiscal year. And the touring grants support presentations that take place between July 1st of 2023 and December 31st of 2024. Okay, so who can apply to the touring grant? It's available to our presenters. So it could be nonprofit organizations or nonprofits that have specific programs associated with the arts. It is not available to independent artists to apply. So we're just looking at organizations that are presenters who can apply. You must be a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Could also be a unit of government, a college or university or school. And again, it's not limited to the arts. So if an artist is working with, say, a community organizer that's running a festival that's a nonprofit, certainly that nonprofit could apply. Or, you know, a public library or a place of worship. Those are all eligible as presenters. And the proposed presentation of the touring roster's work must be open to the public and, again, take place in Maryland. You'll hear that common theme of being in Maryland with Maryland artists. Okay, and the application itself, there's a couple different pieces to the application. So the applicant or that presenting organization will complete the application, and it includes contact information and some general organizational information. And then for each selected roster artist, so whether you're choosing one or if you're choosing multiple, each of those selected artists you'll need to complete a separate narrative for that particular group. So applicants are able to select, again, as many artists within their full application, one application, but it might have multiple narratives, but it can total up to $5,000. So not $5,000 per artist, $5,000 total. And then there's some attachments, which include a Form W-9 and an IRS letter of tax determination to ensure that we know that you are indeed a nonprofit, and then you'll sign with your electronic signature. And moving into the application a little bit further. So there's 5 questions along with some booking information, fees, and associated dates with what's going on. But the questions themselves are going to focus on 5 specific areas. We're looking for you to explain the collaboration between the touring artists and the organization who's applying. We're looking for an explanation of the public value of that presentation of those artists that you've selected. We're looking for the emotional and sensory experience, what that impact or intent of emotional and sensory experience for those that are going to be in the audience or involved in the presentation. Some information about non-dominant norms, values, and narratives, along with engagement of audiences that are not currently being served. So how are you going beyond who you currently are serving to reach additional audiences? And again, the full application and scoring rubric can be found on the State Arts Council website, and there's specific links for both the roster and the grant with those separate scoring rubrics that you can use as a guide. Okay, so again, touring grants are available for up to $5,000. One grant can support multiple artists. Each organization is eligible for one grant per fiscal year. So again, if we recommend that you plan accordingly. So if you're thinking about your whole schedule for the year, how might you consider kind of getting that maximum amount of $5,000 within that one application early on? So again, if you've got multiple presentations in one fiscal year, consider how you can support all of those artists. And touring grants are what we call an all or none grant. So if you're awarded, you're going to receive that requested amount. So we don't offer a percentage or a portion of the requested amount. We're really looking to ensure that the activities can happen if you are indeed awarded. So if you're asking for $5,000 and you're recommended for funding, you would get that $5,000. Okay, and some frequently asked questions that we come across with the touring grant. I'll run through a couple slides of these. Can a touring grant support a touring roster member performing at my child's school? And the answer here is that the performance supported by a touring grant must be open to the public. So if the performance happens during the school day, it would not be considered eligible for the touring grant. But if it happened at the school itself and it was open to the public, that might be a scenario where it could be eligible. Can a non-arts nonprofit apply for a touring grant? And yes, I think we talked about this earlier, that the nonprofit does not necessarily have to be an arts organization to apply for the touring grant. This would be considered an arts program, if you will. So some examples that we frequently see are libraries, community centers, neighborhood associations, etc. Couple other things we come across. One question is, my organization receives GFO, or grants for organization funding, or creativity grant general operating support from the State Arts Council. Can I also apply for a touring grant? And the answer is yes, an organization can receive both general operating support and a touring grant in the same fiscal year. Another question is, are there any matching requirements for the touring grant? And no, there's no longer a match for this particular program. Since the spring of 2020 and the onset of the pandemic, we eliminated that early on temporarily. But of recent, the match has been permanently eliminated from the program as of this current fiscal year. So no match. Okay, so moving along for the monthly application review process. This is new. So we mentioned that both the touring roster application and the touring grant are accepted on a rolling basis, and they're both reviewed monthly. So if you've been somebody who's applied for our monthly programs in the past, in particular with these programs, you might remember that we used to batch essentially a group of applications on the 6th of a month, or on the 5th of the month. So we'd go from the 6th of one month to the 5th of another month, and then have them go for further scoring. We switched it up just a little bit this year, not by much, just a few days. But essentially, we've shifted back to, if you apply in 1 month, you'll be reviewed in the next month. So for example, applications that are received in August by the end of the month, by the 31st, will be reviewed in September, and then notifications will be sent by early October at the latest. And then that monthly cycle will continue throughout the year. And all applications are reviewed by panelists. So this year we have a group of 10 panelists for the touring program. They're reviewing both the roster applications and the touring grants. Based on a typical month, we're selecting 5 of the 10 panelists to review that batch of applications for each month. And again, they're reviewing both roster and grant applications. So each month we're selecting a group of different panelists. So it's not, every other month is the same group. We really are picking panelists that may represent what the applications look like as well. So it'll be a different group every month. Okay, so I'm going to balance my speaking and listening and pass it back over to Laura to go into some more logistics.
Sure, thank you. Yes, these are some specific steps regarding if you are awarded the touring grant. So if you receive a notification that you have received a touring grant, that would mean, first off, congratulations. Like we have said, you're only eligible for 1 per fiscal year. So once you get that FY24 touring grant, that would mean that you have to sit out until the FY25 cycle opens. One of the most important things that you would want to take care of as soon as possible is that you would want to sign and return your grant agreement form via Smart Simple. Smart Simple is our grants platform, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in just a few slides, but you would receive this grant agreement form through an automated email notification. We do need that signature to basically start the payment processing. So we want to get that as soon as possible. And that's really largely because the payment process it can take a while. It can take 6 to 8 weeks from the date of the receipt of the fully executed grant agreement form for you to receive the funds. So that's just something to think about as you're thinking about when to apply. Yes, it does have a rolling deadline, and you can apply at any time as long as it's before your event occurs. But keep in the back of your mind the fact that it can take about 2 months to receive payment as well. If you do receive that touring grant, there is a final report that is associated with it. All of the FY24 touring grant recipients must complete and submit their final report in Smart Simple by December 31st of 2024. And you also have to agree to spend or obligate all of your funds by that assigned final report date. So that one's a while from now, like a year and a half from now. If you're not awarded or approved for the roster itself, we encourage you to try again. Sometimes we just have limited funding in a particular month, and we have to make a cut somewhere. So we definitely encourage you to try again. What we do offer is that we can gather feedback from the panelists who reviewed your application and send that feedback and recommendations along to you, so that way you can work on clarifying your application, editing it, and resubmitting. So if that's something that you're interested in, there will be a link in the notification that you receive. And it's just a simple form to fill out that will let Emily and myself know that you're interested in getting that feedback, and we'll pull that for you and pass it along. Just like we said, just a moment ago, just another helpful hint, though, and a reminder to just think about applying early, especially when it comes to the funding part of it. There are lots of offices that are involved in payment. We do not just cut checks here, so it's not quite that quick and easy. It has to go through many different offices and departments. So again, just thinking about that, and making sure that you're allowing for that up to 2 months period to receive payment is just a helpful hint. Along with the feedback that we can gather from a declined application, we're also available to review any applications before you submit when they're still in draft form. This would go for either the touring grant or the roster. If you want us to take a read through it and offer our thoughts and recommendations, we're happy to do that. You can just email us and let us know that you're interested in that, and send your draft along to us. We do ask for at least 15 business days to process that. As you might imagine, we have a long list of requests, so it does take us some time to work through those. And at certain times of the year, that can be longer than others. Like right now, we're going through final reports in other programs, so it might take a little bit longer. We've talked about Smart Simple a couple of times. You've heard us say those words. Smart Simple is our grants platform, and you do have to submit all of your applications through that. And it's marylandarts.smartsimple.com. And we're just going to show you a couple of slides here in case you are not familiar with it or not registered yet. So if you go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com, you would come to this page. If you have a login, then you go ahead and put your email address and your password in and click login. If you're new to the system, you would want to click the little blue register button that is in the lower left-hand corner. And that's going to open up a series of prompts for you to go ahead and complete. You'll have to choose if you're an independent artist or an organization. And then just based on that, it's going to ask you for a couple of different things. Just basic contact information for you to fill out. It shouldn't take you very long at all. But once you have that information and you're all set up, you'll be able to log in and come to your Smart Simple dashboard. You would want to look in the section that says My Applications and look at the section that says Funding Opportunities. If you click on this, it's going to open up a long list of all of the different funding opportunities that are available to you. This is available to you according to the type of registration that you have. So if you're an independent artist, you would have a certain list. If you're a nonprofit organization, you would have a certain list, etc. So you would want to look here for, depending on which one you're looking for, either the roster application or the touring application. And you would click on the Apply Now button that is associated with whichever one it is that you're applying for there. Once you click the Apply Now, it's going to open the application for you. Something that's really important here is that before you can really start to do anything, you need to click the Save Draft button at the bottom, the little blue button that says Save Draft. This kind of activates the application. It's what allows you to go in and then start the application and start entering your narratives and your attachments and such. Another helpful hint to just know is that the system does not autosave. So make sure, you know, as you go through, maybe after you finish every section, just tap that Save Draft button to make sure you don't lose anything. There's nothing worse than getting all the way to the end and then you lose your internet or something and you've lost the whole thing. So we don't want to see that happen to you. So click Save Draft throughout. And it's basically going to walk you through the process. So it will prompt you to the next question. It will show you exactly where you need to add attachments and such. If you have questions or you're having problems with the system, you can feel free to reach out to me or to Emily, and we're happy to help walk through any of it. But once you're good to go, you're happy with your narratives, you've attached all of your work samples and anything else that's needed for the application, you can click the blue button that says Submit, and that will submit your application to the system. So it's a part of the next monthly review process, and then Emily and I will take it from there. It's a fairly easy system, all said and done. So, but we're happy to help with any questions if you run into any problems at all. And I think that is the end of our content itself. We do have plenty of time here for questions. So I will go ahead and open it up for questions. You can feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask anything, or feel free to put anything in the chat and we can address that. Let's see. It looks like we have a question from Patty to start with.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question about, I actually had two questions. The first question was the touring grant, is that for if I'm understanding, it can be for a singular performance as well as a series of performances, or was it just for a series of performances? I'm in the car, so I was kind of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can be either one. So it's available to support the presentation of a touring artist or artists. So that might be just one singular performance. It might be multiple performances. It might be a festival style setting. It can be many different combinations of things. The thing to keep in mind is that an organization is eligible for just one grant per fiscal year that's available for up to $5,000, but that grant can support multiple artists over multiple events as well, if that's how you determine you want to apply it for. So it could be, you know, you're bringing an artist in the fall to do one concert, and then there's something separate in the spring. It would just all need to happen under one application.
Okay, that was the question I had, and then the other question I had was, for the 501c3 status, can your organization have a fiscal sponsor, or does the organization have to have its own 501c3?
Yeah, I can get this one, Patty. Yes, the State Arts Council does allow for fiscal sponsors to apply. It would have to be a Model A relationship. So if you are working with somebody, I would assume that you would have those conversations in a contract that specifically says the type of model. But really, when we're thinking about Model A fiscal sponsors, it's really that they have oversight of the program and project, including financials. So it's a more of that kind of collaborative effort rather than pass through. But yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. Thank you both. That answers both of my questions I had. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Patty. I think Paulina, you are next. Hi. How are you?
Fine. Busy as usual. Very busy. Thank you. And it's interesting that even when you've worked with a grant like this before, you can learn something new or think about a different way to use it. But I did have one comment before I had a question, if I may. So over the years, from my experience working with artists in different parts of Maryland, that they didn't have so much trouble letting people letting venues know who they were, but the venues were hesitant to fill out the forms and felt that they were complicated. So I've wondered if there was a way to make that easier. I know some of the artists I've talked to spend a lot of time coaching the possible presenters, but I have kind of wondered about that. And thought it might be nice if there were some way to think of to make people, more comfortable. Because for me, I didn't take advantage of it for the longest time, myself. And I was working with people like Todd Marcus. We try and get him on the Eastern Shore, and people just were hesitant. They thought, no, this is complicated, So
yeah. To speak to that too, and thank you so much for bringing that up. Any time that we recommend that we know artists, especially folks like Todd, are really advocating for the program from the artist perspective and working with different presenters and saying, hey, do you know this is available? From that perspective, we do recommend that folks get in touch with Laura or myself to go through. We're happy to talk through the program with presenters, especially if it's the first time. So if you're having that experience, please don't hesitate to say, go talk to the State Arts Council, and we're happy to walk through and support in any way we can.
So I had one other question here. Let's see. Okay, you said full funding. You said you can apply for more than one event. So in other words, it doesn't have to be all in one festival, 2 different events. That's clear now. Let's see. When it's an all or nothing grant, and there's something that I have wondered about. Okay, let's say we have the festival. So we have the fees, we have the artist fees. And then we have the PR and advertising, which I think is going to go up for a lot of people now because the e-blasts are costing more. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but it's substantially more. And then we have things like sound equipment, and we have the worst time trying to get sound equipment covered. Like we got a grant from the City of Annapolis Commission, and they took out anything that had to do with the quality of presenting the sound of the artist that they wanted to cover, if you know what I mean. So we have 2 artists that we were going to apply for. In one case, it's going to be more difficult to market them because this is this Indian jazz fusion group. And I have found out that we have beaucoup people from India, Nepal, and Bangladesh in Anne Arundel County. It's amazing. But trying to reach them, we're going to have some unique material. So I just wonder if, when you see on a grant with one person, maybe it's $300 for doing the promotion. For somebody else, we might want to spend $500 or even $700 because we think it's important to introduce that new, unheard genre and people from other parts of the world. So I'm a little nervous about sending those, figures and you seeing the discrepancy, but we have reasons for it. And so we want to pay good fees to artists, but we also want people to know about the performance. And we also, sound equipment is always difficult to fund. So if you could just comment on that, or
I think and Laura, feel free to add on to this at all, but yeah, in the application, when you're in that kind of budget section, you'll indicate the artist fee itself and what that request would be for you specifically for the fee. But there's also a section that's around additional expenses associated with the presentation of that artist. So you can include equipment that you might need to rent, or those additional marketing expenses that you might need to spend specifically for the presentation of those particular artists. And I think in connection to the marketing materials, you can highlight that in the narrative too, where we're asking for how are you reaching folks in your geographic area of service that might not have been reached. So I think you can make those direct connections from the financials to the narrative itself. And I think it'd be basically what you just said would be a really great point to make within that narrative for that particular group.
Okay. I feel a lot more comfortable. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for that. I think Shanae is next.
Hi. I wasn't sure if Peter had a question before me. I can go after him.
Sure, I see Peter's questions in the chat. We'll grab those after you. Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay, great. Well, first, thank you, Emily and Laura. That was very informative. And I just wanted to know what kinds of grants you all recommend for individually represented artists. I'm registered in Smart Simple, and I've applied, I think, so far for one public art grant. I know this might be outside the scope of our presentation, but just wondering if you had any you'd recommend for individual artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and welcome. We're glad to have you here. So yeah, I mean, there's many different grant opportunities for independent artists, and actually, I'm going to drop a link right now into the chat that will list all of them for you on our website. So that's everything that's available to independent artists, kind of as a broad category. You might want to check out specifically if you're looking for project-based support. I would recommend taking a look at the Creativity Grant, which is another program that Emily and I oversee together. We just did a similar session on that a couple of days ago, so that'll be on the website shortly, so you can watch that as well. We also last year we piloted a program called our Grants for Artists program. That is not currently open, but it is due to open later in the fiscal year. And that is a program that's really offering just day-to-day support of artists. It's not for a specific project. It's kind of general operating support for you as an artist. So that is something that is scheduled to reopen later in the year. So I'd say keep an eye out for that one too. And in the meantime, check out that list. And if there's anything in particular that you want to talk further about, you can feel free to reach out to us if we're the staff or whoever the appropriate person is.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I just had one more quick question. Yeah. I know you mentioned opportunities for panelists. Are these full-time opportunities or usually part-time? And what kind of experience are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Yeah, so they are, so it's not a staff position. It would just be kind of on your own time. They, depending on the program, they require different amounts of work. So some are going to be for over the course of a year. Some are just for a very specific period of time, for a particular review process. Most of the programs, when you serve as a panelist, it's on your own time to do the work and then just submit it. Some involve panel meetings and different interactions that are more scheduled, but they all kind of vary just depending on the given program. But they, generally speaking, they're looking for all kinds of different, experience. A lot of times it's different expertise in a certain area, whether that's a certain artistic discipline or category. But, broadly speaking, we're often looking for, practicing artists, arts administrators, teaching artists, students who are studying different artistic disciplines, and just lovers of art, people who are enthusiastic about art. So I would say check out the website on the Ways to Get Involved page. There are actually some open calls right now, and you might find some more information there.
Okay, great. Thank you both so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Yeah, reach out anytime. That goes across the board to anybody. I want to address Peter's questions in the chat. Thanks for these, Peter. So when an organization goes to register, it asks for a Social Security or an FID. If someone puts in their Social Security but want the payments against the organization, can they change the entry after registering? So Peter, I'm assuming you're talking about when you're registering in Smart Simple, the grants database. If it's under an organization, it should definitely be the organization's number associated with it. So that comes in the form, a lot of times it's EIN, the entity identifier. So you should have that definitely connected and not an individual Social Security number. And you can absolutely make those changes. If you need support, they're happy to help. And then along those lines, can you have a sentence of everything a presenter needs to have on hand before applying? I think that goes, Laura, feel free to chime in, kind of with the presenter themselves and working with the artist of what the artist needs may be. And because it's a collaborative program, you know, I think there's different needs based on who you're hiring. So I would recommend that be part of the conversation that you're having early on with a presenter or presenter with the artist, depending on what, you know, where you're coming from. And that should also be kind of discussed as part of probably your contract. So the contract would be between the artist and the presenter. And I think that goes a little bit hand in hand with your next question about, is the check cut to the organization or the artist? So if it's an organization would be applying for the touring grant. So the State Arts Council would be cutting the check, the funding to the organization, and it would be on the organization to then pay the artist. So again, the artist should be in contract with that presenting organization. So that way, when the State Arts Council passes those funds along, you have the contract in place. You're telling us what you're paying the artist essentially within the application.
Right. But there's no way to keep them to that. I'm sorry. But there's no way to keep them to that, right? Like if they decide, oh, we can't pay you after all or something, or.
I mean, again, I would lean into contracts, which are legal documents. So we would advise that you have those payments, you know, included within the contract. So that way you're held accountable, in legal documentation.
Right.
Yeah.
In terms of the other questions, just like a checklist of like all the things we need to have on hand before we start the application, or, you know, before the application is complete, perhaps. That was all I was thinking in terms of.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I rely on the rubric. I don't know, Laura, what do you think?
Right.
Yeah,
I'm saying, we should have our FEIN. We should have the answers to the rubric. You need to have your W-9. I need the et cetera, you know, just as it goes along.
I would say, Peter, check out, I put a link to the guidelines in the chat. That has the most specific, you know, all the information that you're going to need in terms of not only the narrative questions, but also, you know, like the signed W-9, you know, all of those pieces that you would need to attach and whatnot. So I'd say check that out. And then, of course, if you or the organization have questions or aren't sure, you know, like what's what, feel free to reach out and we can help out.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question, if I could slip one more in. Should we as artists do our portfolio for this grant specifically? Should we try to match up with the rubric perhaps in our presentation? Or maybe you want to adjust the questions for the grant so that it can be a cut and paste kind of thing for them? I don't know. It's just something to think about as you go along. You don't have to answer that. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, definitely that's kind of what we're thinking about, that, you know, if you're awarded, say, you know, think about the roster here, like if you're awarded to be on the roster, those questions would then transition into your profile on the directory. So the directory is something, yes, kind of thinking about how would that translate to your directory page, but you ultimately have the controls on your directory page and what you want to present to the public, and that's something that can be updated throughout the year too. So, if you say you've got a couple of new work samples and great videos and shots of your work, and you want to say, actually, I want to switch those out, or, I've added this person to my group, or our bio has changed a little bit, you can make those updates anytime so you can present what you really want.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, great questions. Thanks, Peter. Okay, who is next here? Patty, I see your hand too.
Oops, sorry, that was a hazard of being in the car.
Oh, that's an old one. Okay, no problem. Daniel, I think I see your hand.
Actually, I have to get going, and I can just email you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Yeah. We do have just a couple more minutes here. So Paulina, go ahead. And you're on mute.
Yeah.
If it's a unit of government like the city or county, they wouldn't have some of the things that you ask for from a nonprofit. So I don't remember seeing those detailed, what sort of things they would need.
You're right. Actually, they would not have an IRS letter for tax deduction like a 501c3 would.
Right.
So that wouldn't be necessary.
But the form will still work okay. And the same with the neighborhood association or school, the form will, in other words, the online submission will still advance, even though they don't have something that's called for.
For a unit of government or school, something like that. But if it was like a neighborhood association, they would need to be a nonprofit organization.
Sure.
So they
Okay.
need to have that. Yeah. So if it doesn't apply, if they're not a nonprofit, they don't fall into that category, but they fall into another. It's like an optional field essentially.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. They can get a little confusing on who has what,
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Any other last minute questions? We have like 2 minutes. All right. Well, if not, this session has been recorded, so it will be posted to the website probably in the next week or so. So you can always feel free to find it, to reference anything if you need to go through it again. And of course, the guidelines and the rubrics are all on the website as well. But you can feel free at any time if you have any questions at all, want to talk through anything, want to talk about eligibility, anything along those lines. We are happy to help. Our email addresses are here, and you can feel free to reach out anytime you'd like. I think that's everything for today. Emily, anything else?
No, just glad to have you all this afternoon, and yeah, reach out anytime, and have a great weekend.
Yes, have a wonderful weekend. It's supposed to be beautiful. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ladies.
Thanks.